All right, and we are live. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Yorona Boster, certified speaker coach, communication coach, life coach, speaker, author, podcaster, all of those things. And I love helping people communicate with purpose, with integrity, and truly to be able to communicate not just with others, but with themselves too. Now, before David introduces himself, I have a request for anybody listening or watching. As this series continues, input is the best thing that we can receive because we don't know how things are landing, then we don't know what it is that you need. So I would love to have input on communication topics that interest you because communication runs deep and it's a lot deeper than we think. So I'm going to ask you not to be afraid to stretch the limits of what you believe communication is all about and how it shapes our lives. Please feel free to DM your ideas to me, put them in the comments, or even email them to me at yorona@yoronaboster.com. All right, David, would you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself before we jump into our conversation?
I will be happy to. I am a speaking and presence coach, and I help people sound fabulous, whether they are on stage, on camera, on microphone, on Zoom, in a boardroom, in person. I have a process that seems to work really, really well, and I've used it on over 10,000 CEOs and politicians and authors and podcasters. And working with Yorona is always a dynamite treat. And I'm happy to be here with her and share my knowledge with all of you.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you, David.
Yeah, I like that. I have to remember that.
Okay, you got to watch it back then. We never know exactly what we're going to say. And I think that's actually the reason why not just communication matters, but conversation matters. Because what's very interesting is the way that we show up in different places and spaces. Sometimes it shows up a little bit differently. And when that happens, it's really organic, it's really beautiful, and it really does matter to the moment. So, for today, our conversations that matter, we're going to focus on, as I like to call it, our prompt question. The question being, how does vocal variety shape the emotional impact and effectiveness of communication? So,
Mm,
David,
that's deep.
I know it is. It's deep because we're talking about the emotional impact and the effectiveness. So let's talk about vocal variety for a second, just so people understand exactly what we mean when we say vocal variety. I like to talk about, in linguistics, we call it prosodics and suprasegmental. These are the elements of vocal variety. These are vocal features that go beyond the words. We're talking about tonality, or some people might call it intonation. We're talking about pitch. We're talking about stress, rhythm, uh, volume, duration, pauses, and I'm missing something. I always end up missing something somewhere. Pauses, that's right. The pauses and also the tempo. The rhythm is different than the tempo. The duration is different than the tempo as well. We can explain a little bit more about that. But essentially, all these different elements, these are the elements that bring emotion, they bring energy, and they bring clarity to speech. So, what
And
do
they
you
make
have?
you sound authentic.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone has you have your own voice print, just like your fingerprint. Your pacing, your spacing, your pausing, all of these features of your voice are unique to you, and you use them differently. And the interesting thing is that you tailor, without knowing it, you tailor your vocal features
Yeah.
to every conversation
Yeah.
based upon your audience, your setting, and the situation.
Yeah.
Without thinking about it, if you talk with one person or a group of people, you change your volume. Without thinking about it, if you talk with someone who's having a hard day or someone who you want to cheer up, you might use a different emotion. All
Right.
of these things happen. However, sometimes when people are on the spot, they start overthinking these things. So, for example, if you have to give a speech at work, you start
Mhm.
overthinking, oh my goodness, how fast should I speak? Or maybe I should slow down. Or what should my tone be? Maybe I should be more monotone and sound serious. Or should I be more enthusiastic and have more variety in my tone?
Right.
And so when we overthink these things, these vocal features, I love, by the way, you calling it vocal features. I've not heard that term before, and I love it. When you overthink these vocal features, you may no longer sound authentic because you are no longer authentic. So we want to help you understand the variety and what all of these things mean. But I will tell you that ultimately, once you understand the different vocal features, how we use them and when and how you should use them, always let them flow naturally. And then you will always sound your authentic self. And that is the key. Always let your authentic self come through.
And I think that's important. And I'm also going to add a caveat to that. Because for me, natural doesn't necessarily mean unprepared. Preparation is necessary. You can still sound natural and be prepared. You can still sound natural and consider the emotional intention that you're trying to drive in the conversation or the speech that you're giving. So when I think about emotional impact and the vocal variety, I think about, what am I trying to impart upon the people that I'm speaking with? So if I want to impart importance, or this is really valuable, this is really important information, my perhaps my tonality is it's not going to be flippant. It's not going to be like, hey, everybody, yeah, I'm so glad we're meeting today. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about da 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 da, right? Because I want to impart that this is important. So that is an emotional intention that we're driving forward to our audience. What if I want to drive forward? What if I'm trying to convey to my son that I'm really disappointed with a choice he made, right? Well, I need to think about the fact of, how does disappointment sound, right? Now, I don't usually like to do that because that's not the way I parent, but it is important that we're thinking about that intention before we step into that conversation, before we step into that opportunity to communicate with our audience, because then we can actually make a much more intentional impact. And that's what I think about. Natural doesn't mean not being intentional. It just means being yourself, but being intentional with what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so for example, if you are trying to sell a product to a customer,
Hmm.
you're making a customer presentation, a customer pitch. A lot of people will become nervous as they make that presentation.
Yeah.
And so when they are nervous, what happens is at the ends of their sentences, they use a technique, or not even a technique, they use a vocal feature, again, to use your word, Yorana, called upspeak, where they
Yes.
may be presenting their presentation to their customer, and every sentence goes up in intonation at the end of the sentence.
Right.
They kind of speak like this. The last word of every sentence goes up in pitch. They might say, "This is a new product, and we've had it for 7 years, and we think you'd be really good. You should purchase this product." And what it does is it sounds like you have a lack of confidence and
Right.
confidence about that product. And so, if you understand how these features work, you can practice. You can rehearse your words, your script, whatever you need to do, and think, well, if you want to convey confidence, then you want your sentences to come down at the end in pitch. So, for
Right.
example, you could say, "Yeah, we've had this product for 7 years, and it works, and we think it would be great for you." And it sounds a lot more confident that way. And so, you nail it by saying, understanding these vocal features, all the different elements of your voice. That's the word I used to call it, elements, your vocal elements.
Elements,
Your
features.
pacing, your spacing, your pausing, your rhythm, your tonality, your emotion, all of these parts of your voice, understand them, know
Yes.
them, and it'd be great if we can go through them all. And
Sure.
yeah, and understand what they do, how you can tailor them, because there are times in everyday conversation when
Mhm.
they are important, but there are times in your business life sometimes that they are really important. The same with your personal life. There are times when you really need to be able to call upon different ways of
Yeah.
communication, and knowing these is super helpful.
Let's talk about an easy one. Tempo, or at least I find tempo to be fairly easy, because tempo is the rate at which you're speaking, right? The speed. We can call it many different things, but it's the speed or the rate at which you're speaking. When you're trying to explain something to people, and this is the first time they've ever heard about it, probably the worst thing you could do is go go through it with speed. because your understanding of your audience means this is the first time they may be hearing about this. Maybe it's not the first time everybody there is hearing about it, but if the majority of your audience is hearing this for the very first time, they need you to slow it down a bit, because they need to hear and then process all the things you're saying. If you're going really fast, what you're saying is, I know my stuff well, but how does that help my audience and my
Yeah.
effectiveness?
Yeah, they will feel like you're rushing them through the information. If you're presenting new information to someone, slow down the rate of your words. Also, at least double, if not even triple, the space between sentences. And what you're doing is you're chunking up the information that you give to someone so they have time to absorb it, to digest it, to take it in. If you're giving a PowerPoint presentation, leave space for them to look at the slides. You know your slides really well. You know your information really well,
Yeah.
but they don't, which is the reason why you're telling them. So you need to bring it down, make it easy for them. And especially if someone is writing down notes, or if you really want them to retain that information, you need to bring the rate down, as you said, the tempo down, leave longer space between sentences. The spaces may feel long for you, but for them, it's necessary. If you jump from one thing into the second thing and then into the third thing, they might say, whoa, whoa, they'll say, slow down, hang on a second. And if you overwhelm them, you will lose them. So take those breaks.
Right. Or they might feel too intimidated to slow you down. Because here's the thing psychologically that a fast tempo can sometimes exude. Sometimes it can say to people, I know my stuff. And then the people who don't feel intimidated to ask questions when we're not slowing down, because
Yes.
they're like, you know your stuff. And clearly there's a bit of that's translating into, you should know this stuff too.
Yeah. It also makes people feel like you don't care about them because they feel like you are rushing them through the information. And so, everyone listening, anytime you are giving information and you have a word that is important to the story, slow down on that word. If you
Yes.
are giving your name in a presentation, for example, or in an interview, or the name of a street that you're telling someone how to get to your home address,
Mhm.
if you rush through these things, the words that they may not know, they won't be able to absorb it. So slow down on keywords. It is,
Slow
you know what this is like here in a magazine advertisement. The important words are in a larger font. So when you're looking at a magazine, if a word is important and the graphic artist has put that word in a larger font, your eyes can't miss it. Well, if you slow down the word, the listener's ears can't miss it. And so you
Right.
need to give them, the listener, more time to hear the important things.
Another piece to that puzzle of like kind of the verbal effect of bolding is is when we stress. So another vocal element or vocal feature is what we call the word is stress. When we're stressing a certain word, it helps people better understand what words to focus on, which changes the emotional, or even not just the emotional intention, but the intention in and of itself, the meaning of the sentence. I have a sample of this an example of this that I love to give. The phrase, I never said she stole my money. Now, what's really interesting is if we say it like this, I never said she stole my money. Now we've stressed the word never, meaning like, no, 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 I didn't say that. No, you must have been mistaken. I didn't say that. Or I never said she stole my money. Now we're stressing a different word. It means I didn't say it. I might have implied it, right? I never said she stole my money. Oh, maybe somebody else did.
Mm.
I never said she stole my money. Oh, maybe she borrowed it, right? I never said she stole my money. Oh, it was somebody else's money. So stress helps us really identify the meaning behind what we're actually saying. Because we're stressing different words, they can hold a totally different meaning to the exact same sentence.
And for anyone out there, if you work with a scriptwriter sometimes for a public speech, they may use a synonym for the word stress. They may call the stressed words emphasis. They may say emphasize a word. They may say hit a word, punch a word, color it, nail it. I've heard billboard of this word. I've heard all different words over the years. They all mean the same thing. It just means to give the word some amount of stress.
Right. I like to call it sometimes verbally bolding the word because
Yeah.
when people take their brain from paper, especially for speakers when they've been scripting for a while, if you script something out, of course you're seeing it one way visually, but now you have to think about the auditory version of that.
Yes.
We change
And
that from the paper of the words on the paper into the auditory version.
yes, and this stress is key, everyone.
Yeah.
It's something that we focus a lot on. When I help CEOs deliver keynotes and interviews and media releases or speak on company podcasts, or when I help politicians with their campaign rallies and fundraising events, and all these opportunities to communicate, the
Mhm.
stress, where you put your stress and how you stress a word is super important. Because
Ah,
if you stress, by the way, if you stress by getting louder, we should talk about this, Yorona. If you
yes.
stress a word by getting louder, it just sounds like you're mad at someone. It sounds like you're screaming at them.
Right.
So the example you used, Yorona, about she stole my money. If you want to stress the word stole, but you get loud on it, it really sounds like you're mean, right? You're
Right.
mad, like you stole my money, and that's very different than you stole my money.
Right.
Raising your
There's
pitch.
a push on something is different than a louder, than a volume raise, and that's another thing that we're talking about. Volume has a different impact than stress. When we're raising our volume or softening our volume, sometimes we're raising it to really reach more people, actually reach more people in that volume raise. Sometimes we're raising it because we're trying to be more intense. You might see this happen in if you go to a church and there's a preacher and they do a lot of preaching and everything and they go really loud for the intensity aspect of it. But sometimes softening a volume can really help cultivate almost an intimate moment when we're softening our volume, because and then almost an intensity where people are leaning in. So it's a different intensity. It's a quiet intensity that gets people to lean in. But
Yeah,
when we're raising our volume and we're like, I am so excited to be here today, it changes the way, right? You wouldn't say, I'm so
yeah,
excited to be here today.
so
Right?
true.
That seems a little bit counterproductive.
Yeah, the softening technique is a great technique to use. If you want people to lean in, it really gets people listening because they can barely hear you. So, you lower your volume, it becomes very intimate, and they really do pull in to be able to hear you. It brings focus. So I would say this: if
Yeah.
you are in a stage where you do need to speak loudly because there are lots of people who need to listen to you, and you need to raise your volume, that's fine. You need to project. However, most people project by also raising their pitch. And when you do that, you sound distant. You sound far away from someone. For example, if I said, "Hey, can you hear me over there?" I'm raising my pitch more than even my volume, even though it sounds like I've mainly raised my volume.
Right.
If you are giving a speech and you do need to project your voice, do your best to use a louder volume, but still stay in your natural pitch range. That
Right.
way, your voice sounds more intimate to every listener. Every listener will feel like you're still speaking just to them rather than speaking to an entire crowd. So if you raise your volume without raising your pitch, then
Yes.
you gain or you regain you maintain really that personal connection with your listeners. And
Yeah.
speaking is all about personal connection.
It is.
Even if you speak to a million people at once, you want each person to feel that one connection to them.
Yes.
And when you raise your pitch by getting louder, you lose that personal connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I spoke to almost a million people, and let me tell you, it's not easy, which is why I recommend a microphone.
yeah,
However, one thing that I will say with volume too is that sometimes when we raise our volume, if we're not doing it the right way, it can also flatten our tone, and that is so detrimental too. So it's the
true.
tonality. It washes out the quality of the voice. It washes out the emotional variation in there when we're washing out the tone. So we have to be really cautious with volume. And if you're not a person who's comfortable using the volume that comes from your diaphragm, where your breath is coming in and that's really what's carrying the volume, then I would highly recommend utilizing a microphone as often as you can. If you are going to speak at some event and they're like, oh, we don't have a microphone, but we should have maybe about 100 people, but they'll be close in, you can just speak louder, right? I highly recommend, if you haven't been trained on the proper way to speak louder, then I recommend saying, no, I really prefer a microphone. Also, because then it does give you the opportunity to go softer for intensity purposes and to
So
make
true.
it feel more intimate. So that's something there. Let's talk about duration, because you did it before, and I don't know if people noticed this.
But
You said,
before we talk about
yes,
duration, I just
sure.
want to give a footnote on microphones.
Yes.
I'm a big believer, in fact, I'm a knower that you can't just jump into a microphone without having practice with that also.
Yes, that's true.
Super briefly, handheld microphones on stage are great for some people and terrible for others. When you hold on to a handheld microphone, it gives your hands something to do, which is so helpful for people who are nervous in front of a crowd. You hold on to that microphone, your hand is occupied. However, that means that you need to maintain the nearly exact same distance of your
Mhm.
mouth to the microphone. That is hard for a lot of people. And you might find the tendencies to walk around the stage and you swing your arm,
You're
but as you
moving.
swing your arm, every time your arm is away, of course, people can't hear you. Now, there's an easier tactic, and that is to use a microphone on a microphone stand.
Right.
But now you're stuck in one spot. You can't move. And I'm
Mhm.
sure everyone on this call knows how important body language is, especially in front of a group of people if you're on stage. You need body language, you need to move a little bit. So another option would be to have a microphone at a lectern. A lot of people opt for that, and it's great for some reasons because if the microphone is at a lectern, you can hold on to the lectern, and like you can't see me now, but like if I'm like holding onto a lectern like this the whole time, that's great. I'm grounded and it feels really good, but no one can see the bottom half of your body, and you lose all of that
Mhm.
personal connection. And again, you can't move. The only
Yes.
other option really is a lavalier microphone.
Right.
Lavalier microphones, yeah, are also called clip-on microphones. Sure, yeah, yeah, like you have, and they're really nice. They can clip onto your shirt.
Mhm.
Unless you're used to using them, a lot
Right.
of people will forget that they are on because you don't see it in front of you. And so, people who
Right.
are new to lavalier microphones tend to get loud. You have to remember
That's
that the microphone is there and it works. It works really well. And if you don't
yep.
see it though, yeah, you start to get loud. And also with a lavalier microphone, you need to make sure that you don't wear clothes which are loud. If you have
Oh.
a starched shirt and you touch your body, it's going to make a loud
Mhm.
noise onto that microphone. So,
Not just clothes, but also, and this goes especially for anybody with long hair. So,
okay,
and
I'm a recorder.
especially if you have a different or if you have the ear mic with and the mouthpiece one, you want to be super careful about where your hair is going. I was at I was moderating a TEDx event, the one in April, and one of the people, she had her microphone was hooked up to her clothes that were kind of up here, but she had a ton of hair, and you could hear the hair swooshing against the microphone, and I was like, oh, we need to fix that. So we've got, but yes, I agree with you entirely. Microphones are definitely a big piece of the puzzle whenever you're
And
doing
shout
any
out for
kind of.
Yorana, because if you do want to get onto a TEDx stage, I've never met a better coach for TEDx. I've never met anyone who understands TEDx better than Yorana.
Thank you. Oh, I've dove in even deeper. So that'll be for another conversation. But I love, we had a couple of comments here. Douglas said, give it some oomph. And yes, oomph is definitely another descriptor for when we talk about stress. But I want to talk about duration. Duration is when we elongate a word. And you did it earlier, David. And I thought it was really funny because you said surprised and you pulled it out. Duration is really simple. It's when we take something and we go, oh my gosh, that line was so long, right? So we're pulling it out. We're pulling out the whatever piece of that it is. So kind of think about duration like the pulling of either whether it's a word or a phrase or a sentence. We're pulling it out. That's where duration comes in. You want to say anything about duration?
Yeah, if I have enough duration of time to say something. Yeah, so here's the thing. There are three ways to add emphasis to a word, to stress a word. One way to stress a word is to raise the pitch on the word. We spoke about that earlier. And make sure that when you stress a word, remember you raise your pitch, not your volume.
Right.
A second way to add emphasis to a word is to add a dramatic pause before the word. Because when you're in the midst of talking and all of a sudden your voice stops, it draws in the listener. It,
Yeah.
it pulls the listener in to hear the next word. So a dramatic pause prior to the word that you want to emphasize is a great tactic. The third way to add emphasis to a word is duration, elongating the word. Because what you're doing is you're giving the listener more time to hear that word.
Mm-hmm. And you're creating a lot of drama. More often than not, duration goes hand in hand with a bit of that drama aspect. Oh, you will never believe this.
You won't believe what happened. Yeah.
You won't believe. I was so surprised. That's really a really great way to add that little bit of character drama in there. Now, we're going to get into pauses more because there's a lot to pause. But I want to go back to pitch because you keep talking about pitch, and I want people to understand the technical aspect of pitch. So pitch is how high or low our voice is actually, our vocal cords are actually vibrating. And what's very interesting about pitch is that we all have a natural pitch, but you can play with natural pitch. You can go up, you can make your vocal cords vibrate at different pitches. So a lot of times men have a tendency to have a lower pitch. Their vocal cords are vibrating at a slower frequency. Females have a tendency to have a higher frequency where their vocal cords are vibrating closer together. However, we can change that. We can play with that. And when we play with our pitch, we're also playing again with the emotional intention of the thing that we're talking about. So let's say you were talking with a baby or a little animal. How often does your pitch go up when you're talking to something that's cute and little and cuddly?
Oh, look at the little
Oh my
thing.
goodness,
Yes,
look at you,
exactly.
little thing. Oh, aren't you just the cutest little thing? That's where our pitch is going up. Or we are in a dramatic state of like, oh my God, that was crazy. Now our pitch is going down. So pitch is all about that, where the vibration of our vocal cords are changing, and it's changing the modulation of where our voice is coming in. I just wanted to be super clear on that because when we talk about pitch, we also need to explain what that is and what that feels like. Not just what it looks like or sounds like, but what it feels like to the speaker.
Yeah, it's a good point. And there is one very confusing, extremely confusing thing about pitch.
Mhm.
And I'll get to that in just a moment. So, as Yorona said, we all have this pitch range
Right.
where it's natural to us, and you can try to extend a little bit and go a little extra high or a little extra low for variety, and that's fine. But of course, if you speak at one constant pitch, in other words, if your voice does not go up and down in pitch, it stays at one pitch the entire time, it sounds monotone, and we call it
Mhm.
monotone. And that's the confusing part. It's
Right.
called monotone. It really
Right.
doesn't have anything to do with your tone of voice. It has to do everything with your pitch of voice. So it's confusing. So if you're giving a speech to someone and they say, "What man, you sound monotone," what
Right.
they are referring to is mono pitch, meaning you're at one pitch.
Right.
So monotone doesn't mean you need to add more emotion or more variety in motion. It means to add more pitch range. You want
Yes.
your voice to go higher on some words or lower on some words.
Yes. 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 And just to come back to our prompt question was all about the impact, and we're showing you by explaining all of these things what that emotional impact looks like, because we all know that we've been in places and spaces where someone is speaking in a monotone way or monopitch way. And what usually happens? What usually happens? We get bored. Oh my God,
Yeah,
I
exactly. Yeah,
can't
boring.
take
Yeah.
this. Oh, this person is going on and on and on and on. It feels like the thing is dragging out. It feels like we're just hearing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes we even just completely check out because we cannot keep our attention focused on somebody else's descriptor, because like that's really what it is. They're just describing something. They're just throwing information out. And at that point we might as well have just read the information ourselves. So I always say like that's probably one of the worst things we can do because it feels like we're just chugging along. I actually have no idea how to speak well, no, that's not true. I can fake speaking monotone, but it's never going to happen for me. Like not naturally, it's just not going to happen. And speaking of tonality, let's talk about that. When I think about tonality or intonation, I think about the emotion and the energy. The emotion and the energy. What emotion and energy are you bringing to the tone of voice that you're bringing in? Go a little further into that, David, please. So I
Yeah.
know you have a lot to say about tonality.
Yeah. If you're, yeah. And this is also confusing because tonality sometimes to people mean it can mean your intonation as you used. It can also mean the emotion, the acting of your voice.
Yes.
Emotion in your voice, and whoops, let me say, let's talk about emotion of your voice, the tone of your voice. The emotion that you convey is critical. The emotion that you convey in your voice tells the listener how to receive your words, your thought, your message, your communication. Your emotion is critical. And so you need to think about how your voice comes through to your listener. And that is very largely based upon your tone of voice. You've all heard the expression when someone says, "Don't use that tone of voice with me." And they might be referring to an angry tone or a sarcastic tone, a cocky tone, a arrogant tone, something kind of negative, right? In a wonky, a snarky tone. And that is a tone that you may want to use if you want to convey that you are being sarcastic.
Right.
There's a time and place for just about everything. You
My
need to think very much about how your tone comes through.
my favorite example is the simplest word and the word that almost everybody in this world uses at some point. And that is the word hi when we're saying hello, when we're greeting someone. There are so many ways to say so much with just one word. If I was to say, hi, that I'm excited to see you, I'm happy, right? If I was to say, hi, well, clearly you know something's wrong, right? If I was to say, hi, why are you angry at me?
Yeah.
Right? There's so much emotion in just one word that we can actually, with intention, make every single word count if we choose to. We can throw words away or we can make every single word matter.
Yeah. The word that has the most variety like that in terms of tone is the F-bomb, which I won't say because we're on a, live call here, but you think about the different emotions that you can add to the F-bomb. It could be a happy word, it could be a sad word, it could be an angry word. It's
Mhm.
everything. But even other words like the word fine. It's weird, but you could look at a restaurant and say, "How was that restaurant?" You might say, "Yeah, it was fine." You could also say, "Oh, it was fine," like, meaning it was amazing, and we even call it, like, fine jewelry, actually. I'm thinking about that expression. Fine
Mhm.
jewelry is a term very often used with jewelry to say that it's extra good, it's extra great jewelry, right?
Right.
It's fine jewelry. But at the same time, your friend could buy a new piece of jewelry and say, "What do you think?" And you could say, "Yeah, it's fine." So tone is very important, and think about it when you communicate, because it has great impact of how you are perceived by your listener.
Yes. Now, what about rhythm? We're almost at the end, but I really want to hit rhythm because a lot of times people have a hard time understanding what rhythm is. Oh, how come rhythm is different than tempo? But rhythm is different than tempo because rhythm is about the flow of it, not just the speed, not just the rate of the speed, but the flow of it. So a lot of times, rhythm, think about poetry. Poetry and rhythm. We have a lot of people who do what we slam poetry these days, and it's really so interesting. But even the most simplest of flows, like doing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, has a rhythm to it. Well, depending on the rhythm you want to put to it, but it's all about the flow. And the flow helps us better understand where the engagement of the audience is coming into play with that. So the flow of your rhythm needs to be assessed to determine whether or not they're going to be receiving you in a way that makes it engaging. You want to say anything more about rhythm?
I know you nailed it. No, that was great. I don't have anything to add, but I would add just a interesting bit of information here. So I guess I am adding something. Sorry. Rhythm is, I think, more than any other vocal element. I
Mm-hmm.
would I would assume that rhythm is more tied to different types of English and different languages. It's
Yes.
really integral in different languages and even different Englishes, Australian English versus the UK English versus Southern English versus New York City English. I mean, there are,
Mhm.
accents and so on. Actually, really, what this would be, Yorana, is part of a dialect, right? Rhythm would be part of a dialect.
Yes. Yes.
Accent, if everyone wants to know, is if you're curious between what an accent is and a dialect, accent is how you how you pronounce certain sounds within a language. Accent is just one part of dialect. Dialect is the whole way a different culture speaks.
Mhm.
Their accent and your rhythm, the
Mhm.
words you choose, and so on. So rhythm would be part of a dialect. So it is really culturalistic, if that's a word. If it's
It
tied
is.
to different languages, yeah, it's
It
interesting.
is.
It's really
You're
fascinating
absolutely
to
right.
listen to
Oh,
different languages and hear that rhythm of their language.
I love listening to the rhythm of language. And what's so fascinating, especially in the States, we have so many different rhythms to you think you're like in a totally different country sometimes when you go from one place of the States to another place of the States, just simply because of the rhythm in
Mhm.
which that they're putting it out there. So I really love that example. That is a good one. And I want to end on the pauses
Oh
because
yeah.
I want to spend a little bit more time talking about pause. I like to call the pause the opportunity to give our audience time to auditorily ingest what we're saying. When we pause in the right moments, we're giving them time to catch up with our brain because we don't beam our thoughts directly from our brain into another person's brain. It doesn't work like that. It's not simultaneous. It's not happening in that very instant. People are taking time to auditorily process what we've said. And when we're pausing in the right moments, it really gives people the opportunity to sink their teeth into what we've just said. Think about it like when you're watching a live show and there's a 3-second delay. That 3-second delay is important. Well, it's usually important to cut out things that they don't want in there. But 3 seconds makes a huge difference when you're speaking to when other people are receiving it. Sound, we talk about the speed of light versus and the speed of sound. But what's very interesting is the sound needs time to be processed. The same thing with light, but the sound needs time to be processed and to pick up the totality of the meaning of what you've just said. So that time that it takes to process it is really important. And it is so key, in my opinion, to having people really feel like what they just heard was memorable. I oftentimes, with some of my speakers, especially speakers who are going on the TED stage and the TEDx stage, one of the things that's so important is I talk about them having quotables, moments where they say something that's so profound and meaningful that they need time for the audience to really register with it. So I tell them you need to create buffer pauses. You've got to pause before you hit that quotable, and you've got to pause afterwards to let it fully sink in. Because again, the effectiveness of our communication really comes through in all of the varieties, in all the vocal varieties and features that we have. But it especially is really important with the intention we set in how we let our audience receive what we've just said. Because if we're just speaking to be heard and not speaking to be understood, then why bother opening our mouths? Do you have anything to add to that?
I'm just pausing for a moment. Yeah, so here's what I want to add. Yes, I love what you said. You're awesome. Pause should be it should be your friend. Seriously, pause. I want you to all write on a stickum and stick it next to your computer. Pause is my friend. Here's the thing. When you pause, it really does pull people in, and it's something that you run it stresses with the people she coaches for TEDx and different stages and just speaking coaching, and I do the same with politicians and executives. Leave pause. However, make certain that you do not fill up your pause with filler words because you will feel awkward having a pause. For example, if I say you need to leave pauses.
Mhm.
Now I left that 3-second gap there, and it's weird, right? It seems weird, but I'm telling you to focus on the pause, and so it sounds weird. Your tendency when you do that will be to put in a filler word. For example, you'll want to say, I was told to leave these pauses. Um, anyway, now that that pause is over, let me continue. So what I did that time was I filled up the pause with some filler words.
Right.
Allow yourself to be in control of not using filler words. Leave dead space. It will pull people in. If they're not focused on it, it will work brilliantly. It works great in negotiations. Oh my goodness, if you're negotiating price, salary at work, whatever you are negotiating for, if you're going back and forth with someone,
Yeah.
they say, it's $10, and you say, no, it's going to cost you $12. Then just be silent.
Mhm.
Don't say a thing. And that awkward silence, eventually they'll say, fine. It's one of the best tactics when negotiating, just to be silent. Pause can do a lot of good. The best speakers use pauses. It's not like there's just pauses there. They use pauses to help communicate. So as
Yes.
Yorona said, if you have that quotable moment, leave a space. Let people take it in. If you want people to absorb what you're saying, leave space between your sentences. You know your stuff, the listeners don't. So give them space, time, pause to be able to hear it. It's a great tactic when speaking.
It is. It's so powerful. And when you get comfortable with it, it changes everything in the way you communicate with people and how much impact you have with them, how much influence you have, how much purpose you have with the people you're communicating with. Because that's what I really want to drive this back to. Communication is not just a way to be heard, it's a way to be seen, it's a way to be valued, and it's a way to make yourself matter. And in a world that's drowning with information overload, where we're taking seconds to watch, there's a video that's 30 seconds and we're barely watching it for 8 seconds before we move on to the next and move on to the next and move on to the next. We're moving so quickly and people are so overwhelmed that they're not thinking about the fact that communication requires a lot more than just saying something. It requires you to give it more thought. And in order to give something more thought, we have to sit with it for a bit. And I always think about how vital it is to communicate with that kind of intention, which requires, yes, a little bit more time, but I think that's what makes it matter more. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah. Do you have any final thought before we go?
I can't top that. That was beautiful. Yeah. Well said. So well said.
Thank you. And I know we had a couple other commentaries in there, which are really wonderful. We could definitely get into some of those later in other conversations that matter when it comes to writing conversation, because written communication is a whole other beast in and of itself. And if I could say one final thing, take your time to actually sit in a conversation. Today, tomorrow, this weekend, just take your time to sit in a conversation. Don't try to rush through it. Sit in it and be with it. Because when you actually come to a conversation and you say, you know what, this conversation is valuable to me, and you show up by giving it your time and attention, it changes the way you experience it for yourself, not just with others. So, all right, on that note, we'll say goodbye and we'll see you around again.
Yorona, thanks so much.
Absolutely, David.
Everyone, thank you.